Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. What is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism? Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism is part of the Fit for 55 in 2030 package, which is the EU's plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels in line with the European Climate Law. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism is a policy tool aimed at reducing carbon emissions by ensuring that imported goods are subject to the same carbon costs as products produced within the EU. Implementation. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism will be implemented by requiring importers to declare the quantity of goods imported into the EU and their embedded greenhouse gas (GHG) emissions on an annual basis. To offset these emissions, importers will need to surrender a corresponding number of Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism certificates, the price of which will be based on the weekly average auction price of EU Emission Trading System (ETS) allowances in euro-ton of CO2 emitted. Objectives. Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism will ensure its climate objectives are not undermined by carbon-intensive imports and spur cleaner production in the rest of the world. Significance. It can encourage non-EU countries to adopt more stringent environmental regulations, which would reduce global carbon emissions. It can prevent carbon leakage by discouraging companies from relocating to countries with weaker environmental regulations. The revenue generated from Cbam will be used to support EU climate policies, which can be learned by other countries to support green energy. How can it impact India? Impact India's export. It will have an adverse impact on India's exports of metals such as iron, steel, and aluminum products to the EU, because these will face extra scrutiny under the mechanism. India's major exports to the EU, such as iron, ore, and steel, face a significant threat due to the carbon levies ranging from 19.8% to 52.7%. From 1 January 2026, the EU will start collecting the carbon tax on each consignment of steel, aluminum, cement, fertilizer, hydrogen, and electricity. Carbon intensity and higher tariffs. The carbon intensity of Indian products is significantly higher than that of the EU and many other countries because coal dominates the overall energy consumption. The proportion of coal-fired power in India is close to 75%, which is much higher than the EU, 15%, and the global average, 36%. Therefore, direct and indirect emissions from iron and steel and aluminium are a major concern for India, as higher emissions would translate to higher carbon tariffs to be paid to the EU. Risk to export competitiveness. It will initially affect a few sectors but may expand to other sectors in the future, such as refined petroleum products, organic chemicals, pharma medicaments, and textiles, which are among the top 20 goods imported from India by the EU. Since India has no domestic carbon pricing scheme in place, this poses a greater risk to export competitiveness, as other countries with a carbon pricing system in place might have to pay less carbon tax or get exemptions. Sitharaman hits out at EU for doubly punishing India with carbon tax. Sitharaman said she has communicated to European parliamentarians that the Cbam would essentially make India pay for greening its own steel production. She argued that this approach punishes India, as it would have less financial resources to invest in its own green initiatives after paying the carbon tax. India and the European Union, EU, seem to be closing in on a dispute with the continental bloc trying to doubly punish the nation with its carbon tax, and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman voicing disapproval to the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBM. Thank you for watching.